The hotel ballroom buzzed with laughter, glassware clinking beneath chandeliers that shimmered like they had something to prove. I sat near the back, right beside the potted ficus, invisible in the way only an older woman in a navy blouse can be. Gavin stood at the center of it, all tall, crisp in his new FBI dress, blues the badge on his chest, reflecting the light and every ounce of pride he carried. And of course, he said, lifting his glass, I wouldn't be here without my mentors. Director Lancaster, Agent Wu, and my late father, who always believed I'd wear this badge. Polite applause. I smiled faintly, though it never quite reached my eyes. He didn't look toward me. He didn't have to. I already knew my role in this performance. And my mother, he added almost as an afterthought, who kept the house steady and always supported me quietly. That drew a few sympathetic nods, the kind you offer to women who bake not ones who used to debrief foreign operatives at 2 a.m. The young woman sitting beside me leaned over, her eyes bright with the enthusiasm of someone new to the bureau. Do you work admin? She whispered. You look familiar, maybe records. I just gave her a soft smile. Something like that. Across the room, Gavin laughed with Deputy Director Flint. A photographer snapped pictures of them mid-handshake. I took a sip of flat club soda and tried not to taste the sting in it. Then came the pause. A sharply dressed man cut through the crowd, eyes scanning. He was older now, but I knew the walk measured like every step still carried weight. His gaze landed on me. He stopped cold. Director Wren, he said. Voice firm, reverent. Ma'am, I served under you during Sentinel Echo. Langley, 2002. The room quieted. My hand, still holding the glass, hovered. I lowered it carefully and looked up. Agent Lin, I replied evenly. It's been a long time. He straightened, saluted, not exaggerated, pure protocol. Across the floor, Gavin froze, confusion flickering behind his composed face as the crowd shifted their eyes now on me. And for the first time in years, I didn't shrink. I nodded at Agent Lin and said, just loud enough, good men never forget. And Gavin. He finally looked at me, not as his mother, but as someone he didn't recognize at all. Before they called me Gavin's mother before the house and the PTA meetings and the casseroles, I was Director Wren. Division 9. Domestic counter-subversion. Not every threat comes from outside the border. Some rot from within, quiet, methodical, dressed like neighbors. I was 35 when they gave me the chair. Young for the bureau. Too young, some said. But my case record didn't leave much room for doubt. The director at the time, Arnold Spence, called me the scalpel the bureau needed. I took that as a compliment, until I learned what they use scalpels for: clean cuts, silent removals, jobs no one wants to talk about. Division 9 was built for silence. We didn't investigate. We buried. Disinformation nodes, domestic breaches in digital infrastructure, internal sabotage, before it reached public narrative. We erased problems before headlines had time to form. Then came the raid in Baltimore. A sting operation turned chaotic. 3 of ours didn't walk out. 1 of theirs fled into the night. I signed off on the report. The final stamp before the file was sealed. It's still somewhere, probably filed under a name that doesn't exist anymore. 2 weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. It wasn't part of the plan. My husband, Mason, was ecstatic, already painting the nursery, while I debated whether my clearance level would allow me to give birth under an alias. Then came the complications. Long nights in sterile rooms, heart rate monitors. 1 too many. We're not sure conversations. I was told to rest. Rest. As if the world would wait. I stepped down from active command at 36 weeks. Officially, I retired. Unofficially, I became what the Bureau calls zero voice assets, operatives with no current title, no badge, but full access when required. Off record, off payroll, but always reachable. Mason never knew. He thought I missed the work. thought I was bored when I snuck into the den at night to read. When he passed 5 years later, he died proud of a version of me that was easy to explain at funerals. And Gavin? He grew up with bedtime stories, not briefing sheets. I never corrected his assumptions. I just made sure he never had to know what I'd done to keep him safe. Until now. Because the protocol Darius activated. It was mine. And I was the only one left who knew how to stop what I'd once started. The sound of the gala still clung to me as I stepped inside the house. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need them. Every floorboard, every shift in the air was familiar. This place hadn't changed in years except for the silence. I walked past the photo wall. Gavin in his academy blues. Mason holding him at age 5. And just below that, a drawer I hadn't opened since Mason's funeral. My fingers hesitated at the edge before pulling it open. It was all still there. Crayon sketches of space shuttles, science fair ribbons, a Mother's Day card with his handwriting barely legible, and beneath them, flat, stiff, sealed in an aging manila folder, was the file I'd hoped I'd never need to touch again. Hearthstone. Alpha Contingency. I sat on the edge of the old couch, hands resting on the unopened folder. It had dust on the corners, but the seal remained intact. Division 9 protocols weren't archived digitally. What we handled wasn't for server rooms. The phone vibrated once, low and deliberate, a number with no name. I answered. Ren. Darius's voice didn't waste time. A threat matrix just triggered a buried protocol, cross-referencing ops from 2005 forward. Hearthstone's flag came up. My throat tightened. That file was shelved. Apparently not deep enough, he said. Your signature's on the activation pattern. Where DC Field Division? Your son's unit. I closed my eyes, fingers pressing against the corner of the file. What's the match rate? 92%. And rising. I didn't ask what had been breached. Not yet. I just stood, folder in hand. Meet me in person, I said. Same place we used before. There was a pause. You sure you want to open this again? I glanced toward the photo wall at Gavin's young face staring out from a past he never questioned. I don't think I have a choice. I hung up. The folder didn't feel heavier, but everything else did. Upstairs, I could hear the hum of Gavin's old ceiling fan, still spinning in his empty room. I took the stairs, slowly, file pressed to my chest, and opened the door to a room that hadn't belonged to him in years. The invitation arrived 2 days after the gala. Formal, printed, embossed with the bureau seal. Gavin had added a note in the margin. Hope you can make it this time, Mom. No apology, just the kind of polite gesture that let him feel generous without examining the past. The reception was at the Jefferson Room, all glass walls and security checkpoints. Agents in tailored suits stood in small clusters, laughter low and professional. I gave my name at the front desk. The woman scanned her list, smiled tightly, and directed me to table 19. I should have known. Table 19 was tucked near the back, next to the espresso machine, and directly across from the recycling bin. The kind of seat reserved for overflow guests and people no one expects to stay long. A young agent in a too-tight blazer glanced at my name card, then away, like she'd seen something mildly confusing, and decided not to ask. From the podium, Gavin spoke confidently, polished and warm. We're standing here today because of those who trained us, pushed us and trusted us, people like Director Flint, Deputy Vega, and others who paved the way. I didn't flinch. I simply took a sip of the lukewarm coffee someone had abandoned at our shared table. He never once looked in my direction. Then the doors at the far end opened, and I saw him. Darius Lynn, clean-shaven, sharper than I remembered, and walking with the authority of a man who hadn't forgotten where he came from. He scanned the room, spotted me instantly, and smiled, not with pity, but with memory. He didn't wait to lower his voice. Ma'am, he said loud enough for the room to catch it. Division 9 was built on your strategy. We still use your playbook. Several heads turned. I nodded, once slow and deliberate, and stood not to speak but to accept the space I had once earned. Gavin's voice faltered mid-sentence. I caught the glance he sent across the room, the slight narrowing of his eyes, as if seeing me for the first time. And then finally, he paused. Like he'd realized he wasn't the only Wren with a badge that ever mattered. We met in the courtyard behind the reception hall, where the buzz of conversation dimmed beneath the soft murmur of the fountain. Darius stood with his back to the crowd, hands folded, waiting for me to speak first. I didn't leave because I was scared, I said. And I wasn't disgraced. I never believed you were, he replied without turning. I left because Hearthstone was never supposed to exist. It was built under pressure, authorized in a vacuum, and ran on shortcuts that should have never passed protocol. I shut it down before it turned into something worse. Darius nodded slowly. Then why is it active again? My breath left me hard. Because someone wants it to be, and they're using Gavin's team to do it. He turned to face me, his expression unreadable. He reopened the archive last week, said he found a chain of identifiers buried in a domestic trafficking case. But Celeste, his access code matches a mirror protocol. That means the intel he used to justify the pull was planted. They're baiting him, I said, already hearing the rhythm in my head. Feeding him the bones of a dead op so they can resurrect the parts they want. And if it goes wrong, they'll pin it on the woman who created it, Darius finished. The one who walked away. I looked past him through the glass doors where Gavin was shaking hands with a senator. He doesn't know he's the one being used. Darius shifted closer. You could tell him. He wouldn't believe me. Not yet. He thinks silence is guilt. Then show him what silence really is. I didn't answer right away. The air carried the faint smell of coffee and cologne, but something colder lingered underneath. I need the original trigger logs and access to his casework. You're not reinstated. I don't need to be, I said. I just need to see what they've buried under his name. Darius nodded. I'll make it happen. Quietly, as I stepped back inside, the reception lights felt harsher. Gavin glanced my way again, a flicker of something crossing his face, curiosity or doubt. Either way, the ground had shifted. He just hadn't felt it yet. He called it a family dinner, said he wanted to talk just the two of us, maybe clear the air. I agreed without hesitation, though I knew better than to trust the tone. There was too much distance in his voice, too much structure in the way he said off the record. The townhouse he'd chosen wasn't his. Rented, likely short-term bureau housing. The door was already ajar when I arrived. Inside, the lighting was too perfect, too warm. A bottle of wine already uncorked, 2 glasses waiting. Steak, resting on the counter, still warm, like it had been timed to the minute. I thought you liked Merlot, Gavin said, as I stepped inside. I never did. I answered, slipping out of my coat and folding it over the nearest chair. He didn't ask why I brought it with me instead of handing it to the closet. We sat at the table, talked about surface things for 5 minutes, his promotion, my garden, the price of housing in Arlington. He asked about my health, like it was a formality. Then he leaned back and folded his hands. I want to understand your past, he said, not the version I grew up with. The real one. I said nothing, just watched the corners of the room while I listened. The bookshelf was new, the photos out of order. One of Mason had been moved to the center, a photo I hadn't seen displayed in over a decade. Too deliberate. I reached under my coat and tapped the inside of the sleeve. The embedded tracker Darius had given me vibrated once. Still live. Why now? I asked. He didn't flinch. Because I think someone used your name to justify an op I should have never inherited. And I need to know if you planted it. I stood and walked toward the photo wall. The dust pattern around the frames had been freshly wiped, like someone had been rearranging the past to match a narrative. You're not being investigated, he added quickly. Not officially, but he didn't look at me when he said it. I turned, met his eyes. You're not the only one being handled. Gavin. His jaw tensed. Then help me understand who's doing the handling. I stepped back to the table, reached for my coat, and opened the inner pocket. From it, I pulled the copy of the original Hearthstone termination memo. I placed it on the table between us and said, "You are." The steak had gone cold. Gavin hadn't touched his glass. The tension was measured clinical, like an interrogation with linen napkins. He pulled a manila folder from the side table and laid it beside his plate. These were sent to me through secure back channels, authenticated by 2 internal reviewers. I didn't reach for them. I already knew what was inside. According to these, he continued, "You altered operational identities during Hearthstone for personal leverage. 3 of the witnesses ended up dead within a year." His voice didn't shake, but I saw it in his eyes, the crack in certainty. "Harlan Keyes gave you those, didn't he?" I asked. He didn't answer. That was answer enough. He told you he was cleaning up loose ends, that Hearthstone needed final closure, and that I was the reason it never got a clean ending. Still nothing. I took the recorder from my coat pocket and set it gently on the table. Pressed play. Key's voice filled the room, too smooth, too polished. Get her signature on the misfiled entries. Backdate the timestamp. We'll say she was operating outside jurisdiction. If she pushes back, we leak the Argentina op just enough to cast doubt. The press won't ask for nuance. Gavin's face drained. The recording ended in silence. He leaned back, staring at the folder like it had turned into something else entirely. I didn't know. "No," I said calmly. "You weren't meant to. That's what makes you useful." He swallowed hard. "Why didn't you say anything earlier?" "Because I knew you needed to find it yourself. If I'd told you, you'd have thought it was just another layer of misdirection." He looked down, thumb running along the edge of the folder. "This was never about you. It was about controlling the exit wound. And they used your name to reopen it." He nodded slowly, then pushed the folder across the table toward me. "What do we do now?" I didn't move to pick it up. "We follow it," I said. "Every name, every file. And we expose who's still profiting off the ghost of a dead op." His voice was quieter now. "And if they fight back," I stood, "then they'll remember what Division 9 was built to do." Darius met me 3 blocks from the secure archive engine, running windows tinted. He didn't speak until we cleared the checkpoint, using my dormant credentials reactivated just long enough to raise no flags. "Level 7 access," he muttered, scanning the badge. "They really buried you deep. They always do with things they're afraid to admit they used." Inside the server room, it was colder than I remembered. Darius typed. While I stood behind him, the hum of the drives vibrating through the soles of my shoes. The entry string I'd memorized decades ago still opened the vault. The file cluster labeled Hearthstone Terminated blinked once, then split into branches. And there it was. Not terminated. Redirected. Keyes had moved Hearthstone's assets into private defense contracts, turned intelligence protocols into predictive software used by contractors and foreign intermediaries. The same witness network we once built for protection was being sold to the highest bidder as preemptive threat modeling. I felt the sickness crawl up the back of my throat. "They repackaged the program," Darius said, voice flat. "Changed the name, scrubbed the funding path, kept the core code, and used my original signature as legacy clearance." He turned to me. "They're laundering surveillance tech through federal subcontracts. This goes beyond Keyes." "No," I said. "It starts with him. And if we don't pull the whole thread now, Gavin's the one who pays for it." We downloaded the records, timestamps, contracts, login logs, audio fragments. Darius copied everything to a clean drive and tucked it into a decoy case. The lights flickered as we left, like even the system knew what we'd pulled from under its skin. Back at my house, Gavin waited on the porch, a folder in his hands. He didn't speak until I stepped out of the car. "They're already pushing back," he said. "Internal Affairs opened a quiet inquiry into your role. But they're not after you. They want to preempt your testimony." I looked him in the eye. "Then we don't wait to be called," I said. "We walk in before they can bury it again." The room was smaller than I remembered. No flags draped dramatically, no theater. Just a long table, too much fluorescent light, and a nameplate in front of me, Celeste Wren, former Director, Division 9. Gavin sat behind me, 2 rows back. He hadn't spoken much since the night we cracked the archive. But he was here. That was enough. I didn't start with a defense. I didn't name enemies. I started with what mattered most. I was part of the silence, I said. Not because I was afraid, but because I believed discretion was safer than disruption. I believed secrecy protected the mission. I was wrong. They let me speak. I walked them through Hearthstone, the redacted origins, the buried failures, and the way we trained ourselves to sanitize consequences in the name of security. I didn't excuse the system. I described it. I didn't ask for my badge back. I didn't ask for restoration. I asked for restructure. Legacy access, I said, should not be used as cover for privatized surveillance. Oversight cannot depend on proximity to power. There were questions. Some polite, some loaded, but I answered each with the calm of someone who no longer had to perform. Then came the footage. Harlan Keyes in grainy clarity, accepting a cash transfer listing access codes by name. One of them was mine. The air changed. A marshal entered quietly and placed a hand on Keyes' shoulder. He didn't speak, just stood and looked at me as they escorted him out, eyes wide, face pale, like someone who'd prepared for every move but the one that came. I didn't watch him go. I turned instead to Gavin, who stood without prompting, and nodded. The knock was soft, almost uncertain. When I opened the door, Gavin stood there with a canvas bag slung over one shoulder and something wooden tucked under his arm. He didn't speak right away, just handed it to me like it was something he'd carried longer than he meant to. It was a plaque. Simple. Clean. Division 9 Architect, Wren C. Below that, in smaller print, built in silence. Survived by clarity. I ran my fingers over the edge, but I didn't say thank you. He didn't expect me to. We sat on the porch, the hum of the fields below filling the space between us. No formal words, no confessions. Just the weight of 2 lives finally realigned by truth, not duty. He reached into the bag and pulled out a thermos. Poured 2 cups. I sipped the bitter coffee slowly, letting the quiet settle the way it used to in briefing rooms after a decision had been made. He leaned back, eyes scanning the horizon, like he was trying to measure something he'd never noticed before. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. He was still here, and that was more than enough. The wind along the ridge was soft, familiar in a way only silence could be. I stood at the fence line, the mountains stretched beyond like old memories folded into sky. In my pocket, the letter remained unopened. I didn't need to read it again. I'd already memorized the line that mattered. I joined because someone like you once led quietly, not loud, not perfect, just true. I slipped the letter back into my coat and watched a hawk lift off the edge of a distant pine, its wings cutting clean through the morning stillness. Some things never needed names to endure.